Good afternoon, everyone. This is Peter Canfield. I'd like to welcome you back to the final session of this 30th Annual Georgia Bar Media and Judiciary Conference, a very timely discussion of media coverage of government and politics. As always, I'd like to thank our many sponsors who help us do this every year. And now, without further ado, to ask WSB Television's investigative reporter and anchor, Richard Belcher, to get us started. Richard?
Thank you, Peter. I got to say to start, I really missed the lush wood paneling of the state bar headquarters, but I'm hoping maybe we'll be back there next year. We've got four great panelists for you today, representing, I think, very different, sometimes overlapping, but different worldviews. Matthew Osborne of the Northeast Georgian, which is, I think, based largely around Habersham County, but I'm sure covers some other counties. Robin Kemp with a great focus on Clayton County with her Clayton Crescent. My colleague Nicole Carr, who's an investigative reporter at WSB and has been in and out of a lot of the public health coverage lately. Jim Galloway, well known to all who love, or even if you hate politics, who follow politics. Jim recently retiring as, how many years, 40 plus, writing for the AJC?
41.
41, made it into the fifth decade. Big news week this week, although I can't remember a week when we didn't have big news. Teachers have been added by the governor to the next priority list to get vaccinations. I heard from some sources this afternoon that lawyers are going to be added in 2023. And we don't know when reporters will be added, but we're hopeful for all of us. Let's start with some brief openings from each of us about, let's start with politics if we can, and then we'll move to governance. Down where the rubber meets the road and services are delivered or not delivered. Matthew Osborne of the Northeast Georgian, I want to start with you. And you're the only person for whom I'm going to make one biographical mention. Matthew was a Heisman voter at one time, and I just think that's really cool,
Years. My first one was Mark Ingram from Alabama, so that was, 2009? And so I did the next few, I think Cam Newton, and then Jameis Winston was in there somewhere. Robert Griffin was in there somewhere. I'm missing one of them, but I can't remember now.
Pretty exciting. Cooler than any vote I've ever taken. You're in a couple of minutes. What jumped out at you over the last year? You can start with politics if you like, about covering politics there, whether national or local politics.
Well, with politics, I think it was really interesting with the pandemic, how much the internet and Facebook and everything played into the campaigns a lot more than they would have. A lot of times guys would be out going to meet people, see constituents, especially in our state Senate race. It covers 8 counties, but a lot of our people ended up doing a lot of things online. And the drawback of that was there was a lot of negativity on there. You know how Facebook can get, and it ended up being people would stage kind of negative campaigns that were not even authorized by their candidates, but they ended up really rubbing people the wrong way, and it ended up changing the dynamic of a lot of the races.
Robin, from your Clayton County perspective, when did you start your website?
Last April.
Oh, wow. Wow. So
Yeah.
you are freshly hatched. Well,
Yes.
What defined your year?
First Amendment issues. With COVID-19, we've had some problems down here. Some of them just sort of logistical. For example, the courts being closed and the whole process of having to make an appointment to go in to pull a file. Normally, I would go in a couple times a week, go down to the basement, you have to make an appointment a week, and then you go in and you have to send your credit card downstairs. It's a big deterrent. Let's put it that way. In Forest Park, we have had a pretty epic ongoing battle to go and cover the meetings. It began when the meetings were being held online over the summer and you couldn't even hear it. So I thought, well, maybe I just better go down there and cover it in person, and they threw me out. So I went back and they threw me out. And the Amendment Law Clinic and Derek Bauer were a big help in getting that resolved somewhat. And they have now put in a $30,000 streaming system, so people can now see their city. I don't think anybody, and when the beginning of the outbreak happened, they've really had an impact on how local politics and state politics are playing out.
Nicole, how much did you get pulled into what I would call pure politics last year? That is covering any of the candidates or any of the headquarters or any of the issues, and how much were you really focused on the big issue of the year, which is the public health crisis?
Got pulled in a ton to the point where it was the beat. You know, I kind of pulled out of COVID from October until really now, and now we're into voting laws and everything else. But you know, we kind of go general assignment with our beats, and we do have a political reporter, and we have reporters who are, you know, focused on the Capitol. We dip in and out, and the Capitol has become home, and more so, not so much with the candidates, but with, you know, center stage for disinformation. And so the job became explaining process and explaining how things work and why we see things the way that we do. And I know Robin can attest to this because we're kind of following each other as we were working election nights and the days that followed. We were front and center and had eyes on what election workers were doing, what poll watchers were actually doing. And then to see the complaints that came out afterwards, you're like, oh, wait, I was there. This didn't happen, or this happened, or that's a mischaracterization of what happened. And it really helped to have the cameras there, because we ended up seeing the same players file these lawsuits or be at the center of complaints. And we literally had timestamp video of things they were talking about. And it was never more important to return to a Twitter thread or a piece of video you had posted, because it was almost a first step in combating misinformation. And you just didn't even know it at the time. So there's so much value to being there. And then COVID, I mean, that's another conversation, but really politics has and continues to kind of.
Tell you what, we'll come back to COVID because like everything in America today, it gets politicized. Maybe it should. I mean, after all, it is, maybe everything should have some political dimension to it. So I won't complain too much about that, but sometimes it does seem to go a little nutty. Jim, you actually, you know, that was your lifeblood, was politics. You don't dip in and out of it. You dipped in and never left. Your thoughts on, if you got a nugget or two that you didn't put in your columns that you can share with us today? You need to unmute. Jim, unmute.
My apologies.
That's okay. That's okay.
No, I would agree with Nicole on I think just the battle with disinformation for me was the greatest hurdle of last year, and it continues into this year. And I can give you one small example, one very big example. A small one was you recall that Kelly Loeffler was locked into this kind of interior primary battle with Doug Collins. She was trying to declare herself so conservative. She launched a TV series, a couple of TV ads in which she compared herself to Attila the Hun. Okay, and you've got Attila out there saying, you know, saying he's going to do this to reporters and he's going to invade China. Well, I called up Loeffler's campaign guy, and you know, I was laughing at it, and he said, you know, you've got that screwed up. Attila the Hun never invaded China. You're thinking Genghis Khan. And his reply was kind of off the cuff, but it was telling. He says, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And that's the small instance. The larger one, the one where I really opened my eyes was an incident that showed it just wasn't, the disinformation isn't a war just between us. It wasn't between us and the Trump operation or the Republican operation. This is a war within the Trump operation, within the Republican operation. And it was, if you recall, okay, we had the election on November 3rd. Georgia was called for Joe Biden on November 8th. That was a Saturday. And the very next Monday, you had Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, two Republican incumbents, call for the head of Brad Raffensperger and demanding that he resign. A fellow Republican, they demanded that he go away because he wasn't willing to hold out and say Donald Trump won this election. And to me, that was just a stunning moment, a stunning turn in politics. And of course, it got worse as it went along because you had the Texas lawsuit that Loeffler and Perdue also signed on to, as did most Republicans from the U.S. House from Georgia. They signed off on the Texas lawsuit demanding that those 5 million voters in Georgia, that votes in Georgia, that they all be discounted. To me, it was just a really eye-opening kind of look at the war on factual information just within the party, within the GOP. It's not this traditional, back and forth between politicians and the press, but you have Republicans struggling over the place of the truth in their operation.
Matthew, you're from, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my guess is Habersham and the surrounding counties up there were 80+% Trump counties.
Yeah,
I
I believe we were around 83 for Trump.
And how did you cover this as it played out when and I don't know what if your paper does editorials or if you or your paper is known to have a right of center or left of center position, but how did you kind of push back from it and just cover it as you saw some of this story playing out, as Jim just pointed out, not just here, but all over the country?
Well, I mean, again, like you said, 83% of our folks, were obviously, first of all, no one accused anyone in our county of fraud because Trump won our county in a weird coincidence. We didn't have anybody making that accusation. And and we tried to localize the story to where we went to our elections office and asked them, have you checked this and signatures and those sort of things. And they said, they had all their ducks in a row and everything in order. And it was like, well, it's kind of like you say, you guys invited me, I know, to get a different perspective from kind of the Metro Atlanta. And it really, we're only an hour and a half apart, but it feels like another world in a lot of ways. And it's really very different, as it's hard to take Georgia as a whole. Almost, you can't really make a generalization about Georgia as a state politically right now, because it's a real different world down there. And we like I said, we tried to cover the story, but we definitely had legitimate news stories talking about controversies that we had our readers complaining that, why are you writing this? This isn't true news. And it's like, well, I mean, it's happening. There are, people are talking, this is going on, but a lot of them didn't want to hear that stuff.
Did any of the threats and any of the criticism get nasty, or was it just pretty straightforward? And
yeah, pretty straightforward. I mean, it was, and we had a lot of our letters to the editor were really we had some interesting gems. We had one lady who was absolutely wrote a letter after the election saying she looked forward to Trump being inaugurated again, because it's just going to happen. I mean, he's going to be inaugurated again, and I can't wait till January 20th when Trump starts his second term. And it wasn't like, I hope this happens or this is what I like to happen. This is a fact. It's going to happen, and I can't wait to see Trump up there again. It's just like, well, all right, here we are.
Yeah, leave it alone. Robin, tell us about some of the feedback you got in the fairly feverish days of mid-November and as we approach the Senate runoffs.
Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm having a bad connection. I'm sorry for that. The really craziness had to do with the poll observers, both on starting with the first night of election night, when people were coming in just out of nowhere in teams and being ordered and directed by other people to go stand here and go stand there, and really sort of hacking the air was taped off for observers, to the point where it was really, really disruptive. And it seemed there were some older people who were apparently coaching these young college students, young Republican types who were coming in as observers. And suddenly they would go away from their little conference with this person who told them what to look for, and they would see things happening in front of them that I was standing there looking at and I didn't see happening. For example, ballot commingling, things like that. And this got more and more heated up over the course of the overnight hours. And by the time the TV folks came around 2 or 3 in the morning to start doing morning hits, I was so grateful when y'all got there, because it was getting really hot.
Thank God somebody says that. Nobody ever says that.
I
When
was
we get
so
there.
happy to see y'all. As soon as everybody came in with big cameras and tripods, all those folks ran out the door. They didn't want to be on TV. So they were gone. So it calmed down. But there was a lot of very passionate complaining from some of the observers, in particular some of the libertarian folks who had been on an ongoing basis complaining about the way elections were run. The Clayton County Elections Office moved from the bunker to the Clayton County Police Department's big meeting room just next door to do. There were enough observers complaining about whether or not they can have a person on the floor based on the number of tables in the room, that they moved it again to a school down the road, and things happened there. Crazy, strange dude came in and sort of was disruptive and was making everyone nervous, but he went away. The cops made him go away. And it was just that for the longest time. And then with the congressional election, there were a couple of people who had state GOP field credentials who were following around a Clayton County van from the elections office that was going to pick up ballots from the drop boxes. And they were concerned about the chain of custody. So they were following this van around, but it was to the point where the people in the van got nervous, went into the fire station and called the police. And the police came and said, you're really bugging them, and they left. So it was almost as if I got the feeling that people were trying to push the limit and see just how much they could do to sort of push back against whatever the rules were about where you could stand, who you could talk to, where you could go, what you could shoot video of. There was a woman who was thrown out for doing cell phone video of the counting room in the beginning of the November 5th election. So all of that was really strange to me and really disturbing.
Nicole, I want to, if the panel's okay with this, steer a little bit away from election politics, but stay on and move to the politics of COVID if we can. You've covered, Nicole, some of the various moving parts. I mean, there's so many of them. There's so many metrics out there to gauge how the country's doing, how the state's doing. What have you covered most recently that you found revealing about the public health crisis? And explain to us, if you can, if you had any experience with how it got politicized.
Well, I guess I'll back into that. Let's start with the politicizing, because early on, I don't know if you guys remember, every week we would be after this federal report, the White House Task Force report on COVID, right? And what were they saying about Georgia? And it was never made public, and often the Trump administration and his experts and everyone who was at the table was a lot tougher on Georgia than what we were hearing from our state officials in terms of the outlook. And so public pressure had mounted in places like Oklahoma, where they ended up posting the report every week after public outcry that the secret federal report is out. We don't really know what our standing is. We don't understand our own data. And even the feds under this administration is saying, hey, we're not looking too good. Because remember, we remain like the hot spot, one of the red states for weeks on end. And I can remember catching up with the governor and going to an event specifically to ask, would we release the report? And, you know, when I got a chance to ask some questions at an unrelated event, he was, you know, very forthcoming. It was kind of like, with all due respect, we're going to do what we need to do in Georgia. Thanks for the report, but not wanting to criticize the folks behind the report, because we're heading into elections, we're aligning with allies. They want to be very careful about the messaging. We do believe we're doing the right thing, despite even the administration saying we're not. And I can remember him walking away when I asked, sir, will you make it public? Governor Kemp, will you make the report public? And it being like a point of contention and kind of uncomfortable in the exchange. And I wasn't really understanding why. And we were literally getting this thing from the Center for Public Integrity, from, you know. And so that was the part of it that was uncomfortable. It was almost like talking about the pandemic and how to move forward was automatically a political story when you're not approaching it that way.
Right.
And so most recently, and you guys feel free to cut me off. What we've been working with is access and messaging. I can remember on
Access to what? Access to more data?
well, initially it was, the data has been one thing, and making things very clear and understanding what everything meant. Remember, there was a time when we weren't antigen tests, which everybody was moving toward getting a quick rapid test. That data was counted as a probable positive case, when we knew the science was saying, if you test positive on a rapid test, you're most likely positive. So why isn't the state saying that, you know, these are our cases, and if you test negative, you might want to back up with a PCR test? What did that mean in the data? How were we going to present that? That was one thing. And then I can remember covering the reopening of the Georgia World Congress Center because our hospital capacity we were hurting in the hospitals. And we took this tour, it's opening back up. And then we're hearing on New Year's Eve that we've got vaccine in other parts of the state, nobody's taking it. We got to figure out how to get down there. And I don't know how we're going to do that. And Governor Kemp was saying, if I have to get in my pickup truck and go get this vaccine, I'm going to do it. It was like, well, how does this, the rollout was just
Right.
all over the place. And
let me move to Jim here just a second and evaluate some of this. If you're looking at Brian Kemp's 12 months from hell, evaluate some of his highs and lows politically. I mean, I'm going to volunteer that perhaps a low point was the reopening where someone decided to add tattoo parlors. Yes, I know tattoo artists have to make a living too, but they just got killed on that. But the economy, I mean, any of you who worship at the altar of Jim Salzer like I do, I mean, every month we get this report from the AJC's revenue expert that the economy is doing much better, far better than anyone thought. We're getting 89 or 90% of the vaccine we have into arms. Give me a few of the highs and lows for the governor this year.
Well, Kemp's primary problem was that Donald Trump was running a presidential campaign in which his main thrust was that the pandemic didn't exist at all. and there was nothing to worry about. It was going to go away in June or in September.
By
We were going to have,
Easter, we were going to be open by Easter. Remember?
or we were going to have a vaccine to people by the end of October. So I mean, he was dealing with that. He did have, I think he was pressed by his staff and people to open up a little bit too early. I think the reason it's very interesting. His emphasis throughout this pandemic has been on the survival of small businesses, which you can understand. They do play a big part in the economy. There's a lot of employment there. It was not so much on the hourly low wage worker, and those people have been kind of left hanging a little bit out there. They're the ones who are kind of forced to. They're the grocery store workers, the people who have to get out in order to earn a living. But you're right. I think the tattoo parlors was a real kind of odd note, and you'll note it didn't happen just once. You'll note that it happened when the governor put out his budget proposal for the new year. He didn't include any increased spending for community health centers, but he did include an increase in state funds for tattoo parlor licensing.
Which Jim Sulzer caught.
Yeah, which was just I don't understand the attention that deserves. The other problem has been, as Nicole pointed out, vaccine distribution has been a real problem. But again, Donald Trump becomes a blockade there. Kemp could not, until January 20th, Brian Kemp could not complain about the supply of vaccines sent to Georgia or the spottiness of it, or he can do that now. He's free to, he feels free to do that now. But up until January 20th, he couldn't do it. The other thing I think we need to kind of focus on is, there's a really interesting philosophy of government playing out here. Brian Kemp has Donald Trump shoved the problem of the pandemic down to the states. Brian Kemp has passed it on to the individual counties and community health districts in Georgia. When it comes to there had been, we were very slow to create a statewide database of where you could go to get a vaccine and how to make a date for that sort of stuff. There was a line in his I think in his address to the legislature early this year, in which he said, when we beat this pandemic, it won't be because of the government, it will be because the community got together and beat it. And you contrast that with what Joe Biden has done since January 20th. He has done a very, very massive federal rollout of assistance to states, not just financial with the relief package that's making its way through Congress right now, but the opening of these massive vaccine operations, the delayed purchase of all these vaccine shots that are supposed to be in everybody's arms by midsummer. It's a real interesting contrast in the role of government, and I'll be very interested to know how it plays out in 2022, and how both Democrats and Republicans characterize the results.
Matthew, what's happening in your immediate community and the surrounding counties? Are people getting vaccinated? Are the lines dreadfully long? Are people having to drive 60 miles out of the region to get a vaccination? What are people saying?
Well, no, as a matter of fact, they don't, because we have one of the 4 vaccination sites that's a half mile from my house. As a matter of fact, we're allegedly serving 80 counties in North Georgia, which, as you can imagine, it started up this past Monday, and I was actually pretty concerned that the traffic just getting my kids to school was going to be difficult. because of that, because again, I got to go right through there to get to my kid's school. But so far from what I've seen this week, the site has run really orderly. They've been a lot more organized than I thought when they originally said, here's how it's going to go down. It's only going to take you 25 minutes to get your vaccine. I thought, yeah, that's like giving me a fast pass at Disney World. Yeah, you're going to be on Pirates before you know it. But I thought, no, it's not gonna work. I'm going to be backed up. There's going to be traffic everywhere. And it's really not been bad so far. Now they're talking about ramping it up to more vaccines per day later on. They were talking about 1,100 a day, going up to 2,000 a day. And if they're able to do that, first of all, I think it's great for public health. I don't know how that's going to affect our traffic, but the good news is our folks aren't going to have to go very far at all. But we've got a lot of people coming to our county that are, also, we wrote an editorial this week about somewhat of a secondary economic benefit for our county. There's a lot of people from a lot of counties are going to come over, get a couple of shots. They're going to get something to eat. They're going to see the place and maybe, stick around, spend a little money. So it's kind of a side effect of this whole thing.
Do you care to speculate on the level of vaccine skepticism in your community?
There's definitely a percentage of people who don't want it. I don't know if I have that number in front of me. I know that they originally, when they were first rolling out the vaccines in December, and the hospital staff was going to be the very first to get it, they said initially only about 10% of the folks wanted it, which was a little shocking for me. That was at our hospital authority meeting in December. And then that number started to rise. Our CEO got it. A lot of our leaders in the community, the sheriff was very vocal about getting it. Our emergency director got it. And I think that they showed a lot of leadership, and a lot of their staffs kind of came along. So that percentage went up. But the initial reports when it first came out in December were very low. But I think we're starting to get up there a little higher now.
Have you had any high profile illnesses or worse yet, deaths that have sort of driven home the message? I mean, the beloved high school coach or preacher or counselor or anyone like that?
I don't know if it drove home. We had a big one with Dr. Mark Ivester was the president of North Georgia Tech. And he was a very healthy guy, early 50s, I believe. And he caught it, and he was in real bad shape in the hospital and ended up passing away. And he was a real beloved guy that a lot of people respected. And I know that hurt definitely the academic community and the community at large. A lot of people, well, like I said, really, he was very involved in our community. So I don't know if that made a difference in terms of people wanting the vaccine, but I know that was probably the highest profile person we had pass from it who was not expected to.
Robin, yeah, thank you. Unmute. What has been your vaccine / pandemic coverage, the highlight of it in the last 2 or 3 weeks? What's the trend?
Well, the biggest thing is that we also have one of the 4 sites over there at Delta at Hartsfield. The rationale for that, according to Governor Kemp, was because it's near a heavily African American county. But the problem is of according to age, according to whether or not you're someone, and that is not something that is necessarily tied to somebody being of one racial background or another. But it is in an area where perhaps it would be able to serve more people than just the county. Now, the county has been kind of getting a bad rap. The Clayton Health District has been getting a little bit of a bad rap about not getting shots out, but they've been getting shots out. It just hasn't been, I guess, enough to make people happy. The concern that I have is that people coming in and out of the airport, and this is a story coming in and out of the airport as a vector, and then folks who work and live in Clayton County, people who work at the airport and live in Riverdale or living maybe in College Park, or maybe they live over in Jonesboro, taking that home and spreading it around here. And that's something that we're all kind of waiting to see what happens.
Nicole, there's so many metrics we can use to measure success or failure or the progress or lack of it on fighting the pandemic. When we hear that Georgia has put 89% of the vaccines that have arrived here into arms, Is that good? I mean, it sounds like a good number. 2 weeks ago, we were at 70%. Is 89% a good number? Is it, and we'd love to have 99%, but how do we measure that?
Well, I think, one thing that we have talked about is more granular data, right? To really figure out where things are happening. And so when we have an overall look at distribution or allocation, and you say, well, that's not so bad, you have to look at also what it means to specific areas. I'll give an example. We did a story recently. We wanted to look into unused doses, right? Where is the vaccine being thrown away? Where we were seeing, and we only saw, and we were talking about this in the email,
Yep.
It was like 4,000 doses. That's nothing, right?
Statewide.
Right.
Right.
Then the providers are required to report this. It's a federal and state requirement that when you throw this stuff out, that you're putting it into the same system that you would put your testing data into and all of that vaccine data. So nothing, 4,000, we're looking good. But, and we're still waiting on the information from this, what we could see from our initial request is that most of the 4,000 was being thrown away from a couple of the same spots. Okay, so what if we're still waiting on.
What were they? Do you recall where they were?
Well, so that's the next story and it's coming. We've been promised the records by the end of the month, but let's just throw out a scenario, and I'm totally just making this part of it up, a location. But what if, Toccoa is the place where 2 pharmacies don't ever get any shots in anyone's arm? What are the 2 places where the providers, the 2 or 3 places in the state where everything is getting thrown out? And then you have a deeper look at whatever, access, inequities, mistrust, where we need to work on things and where.
Left off incompetence.
Yeah. So then so when we get bigger pictures, and yes, that is good news, and we should celebrate that, and we need to report all of this in context, and then we need to find where we still have these issues and why, and where do those people go? Robin's talking about Clayton County as a whole, but who works at an airport? Where do they go from the airport? Where does it spread? Where do we have problems? And so that's the more nuanced reporting, not to find a problem, but to find the truth so that we are helping specific pockets of because we're each other's keepers. What happens in South Georgia matters to us here. What happens here matters to the next person. And so the deeper we go, the more nuanced we are, the better we are for it. And so, is that rate good around here? Yeah. What is it looking like compared to New York? What is it looking like compared to our neighbors?
Does anybody, any of you can answer, I don't know, but does anybody know if Georgia's, the amount of vaccine as measured against our 10.5 or 11 million population, have we gotten our fair share in the last 2 months? I mean, if nobody knows, that's fine. Jim, do you know? Matthew, do you know? Robin, Nicole? I don't know.
All I know is that distribution is supposed to be population-based, state by state.
And has anybody done? My God, if there's a zillion charts on the internet and on the various newspapers and publications. I mean, there's like data overload. I'm just wondering if there's supposed to be an equitable distribution. Is there within a reasonable 2 or 3% range?
I don't think that's something we're going to know until months down the line. But Richard, if I could just direct this conversation on COVID into a real important political question that's playing out just now, and that is the COVID in public schools. I mean, I truly think that's the most important thing. That comes September, when we judge whether this anti-pandemic effort has been a success. Come September, I think that's how we're going to measure whether we succeeded or not. Whether we have K through 12 operations across the state, and thus businesses opening to reflect that. If we don't, that's a serious problem for both Brian Kemp and Joe Biden. If we do, well, Brian Kemp has a tough fight in 2022, but that's a good start.
Didn't the CDC, the new director of the CDC, say about 2 weeks ago that we really ought to reopen, because if you mask and socially distance, particularly with the younger grades, you're in pretty good shape. The risk of transmission is low.
The problem is that if the caveat is if you do the right things, and maybe Matthew can speak to this, but you have many schools. You have 181 or 83 school systems in Georgia, and they all operate under different rules. And I could point you to many counties where there never was a mask mandate in place. And the whole pandemic was treated as something that didn't exist. I think that's slowly changing now, just given the change in the political climate. You've still got parents who are withholding students and wanting to go online simply because they don't trust the system that's underway right now.
Matthew,
Yes.
your school's open in the surrounding counties?
Our schools were open. We were supposed to open early August. They moved it to early September, but we did open in September. The schools were open for the whole fall semester. They did first of all, and if you went to a football game, you would never, if you had been in a coma for 8 months, woken up, come to our school, gone to a football game, you would never have known there was anything wrong. It was, the kids were all, I was shocked the first game I went to. There were kids, our student section was just like old times. But and the schools provided a daily update on their staff and students in terms of how many positive cases they were dealing with. And for those first couple of months, it was reasonably low for a system that's got 8,000 students and staff. It was very low percentage. And then right at the end of the semester, Thanksgiving, Christmas, it really started to catch up. And then we lost at the beginning of January, we had to delay. We had to do 3 weeks of virtual because we had no bus drivers. All our bus drivers were out. We had no cafeteria workers. They were all out. So
Go ahead,
I'm sorry.
Were they sick or did they want to come to work?
No, they were sick. They were actually sick.
Okay.
Yeah, from the holidays and whatnot. And then, so they finally got those cases to come down and they were able to reopen. And we've been good since then. We opened January 25th after 3 weeks of virtual, and we've been very good so far, very low. And our cases have come way, way down. We were at something incredible in mid-December of 47 cases a day in our county, which is a lot. And we're back down to 4.5, 5. So we've come way, way back down.
Robin, what's going on with your school district?
They're not opening yet. They are going consistent on 100 cases per 100,000 for 6 weeks. So, your guess is as good as mine. It might be a few more months, given that the vaccines are coming, especially if the teachers start getting vaccines, and that might speed the process up a little bit. But that is what Dr. Beasley has said is the benchmark.
Jim and I may not be around to cover it for age reasons, but we're looking at a perhaps generation-long effect on some sizable cohort of kids, the kids who were maybe already slightly behind or on the cusp and are just going to be hammered by this year and a half of virtual learning, which is not going to be very effective for some. Nicole, mother of 3, you must have friends who are also mothers. What are people saying? I'm going to personalize it a little bit. What are people saying? What are their anxieties about how to stay up as best possible and not have a huge catch up in the coming years?
I think the parents that I'm around here, and let me say this before I go on. I can also recognize a great point of privilege from which many of us stand. Okay, so concerns in my circles versus other people's circles versus, it's all gonna change. And the parents around me are concerned about an emotional toll. You know, I told you this week, my first grader had to go into school, first time stepping foot in the school in almost a year for a mandatory test. And I realized the night before, we didn't know where her classroom was. We didn't know, you know, they stopped me at the door and said, we'll take her. She's okay. So I got her masked up. I'll come get you in a couple of hours. And she comes out and she's happy. She's happy. She's seen kids. She's talking like I hadn't heard her talk around even her best friend, her sister, who's, you know, they're 3 years apart. And then we've got the baby. So there's that emotional deal. Over the summer, myself and one of our producers, Leah Dunn, produced a piece about the digital divide. And we ended up in Schley County. We ended up taking a look in Clayton and Rockdale in the school systems that didn't even have systems in place to track students who had been lost in translation. In other words, it was a form of digital truancy and no one knew where the kids had gone. Rockdale County last year in those few months in our reporting, and we surveyed over 170 school districts, had lost 3,000 students.
Yeah, I think the number statewide, the Georgia Public Policy Foundation assembled at 30, is it 36,000 or is it, or maybe it's a bigger number. There's a lot of kids who are quote unquote missing and nobody's really quite sure where they are.
They're not sure where they are, how to properly track it, what to do about it, how to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. And when you're going back to the emotional issues, I'll just, without outing anyone, I mean, we hear a parent going off on Zoom a few weeks ago, like, F it. And my kid gets upset because that's her little friend she's got a crush on, and his mom just cussed at her. And she's like, you know, frustration. What is, even when you have the resources seemingly in place, and how has everyone's attitudes changed and what their level of tolerance and how the kids are dealing with it changes from one house to the next and so, yeah, we have a long-term problem because we have people coming out of this at different levels of tolerance, mental health, ability levels, comprehension levels, and there is not a one-size-fits-all answer. That's the thing at the end of the day. We can fight, we can talk politics, we can talk policy, we can do all of this, and there is not a blanket thing that anyone can do that's gonna serve everyone properly. There's just not.
Jim, is this not just the political upheaval, but especially the pandemic and the wrestling over the government response? Is this in Georgia gonna fundamentally tilt one way or the other, the trust in government, skepticism in government, respect for government, people's thoughts about government competence? Do you want to venture some speculation on that?
Well, the first thing, and I'd just like to riff a little bit off what Nicole was saying, is I think what's going to happen is that people are going to have a greater appreciation of local government, at least when it comes especially when it comes to schools. I mean, we are now getting to appreciate exactly what the physical school building is within a community. What kind of just the social cohesiveness that it brings to a community. So there is that. I think that's going to be extremely important. I think if this vaccine rollout and we keep getting, we've got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine coming online right now. That's a one-shotter. We're going to have maybe, I think maybe 5 vaccines in the mix by the end of the summer. That does speak to government competence. And I think that argues well for on that side. It's interesting if you watch what Joe Biden is doing right now. He is we have been locked in this kind of congressional tug of war between Republicans and Democrats, all on one side or all on the other side. If Biden is calling for bipartisanship, Republicans refuse to play or say only bipartisanship on our terms. Joe Biden is trying to redefine bipartisanship by going around Congress, by going around Republicans in Congress, and reaching out to people like Brian Kemp, like Rick DeSantis in Florida, like any number of Republican governors, asking them what they want, what can the government send them that they need, and I think that could play a very, very critical role in how Republicans kind of wean themselves away from the all government is bad and government can't do anything but mess things up kind of philosophy.
Let me, we've got about 8 or 9 minutes here. I'd like to steer it toward a pet, I'm going to call it a peeve, a pet. This is where I've really made my living for the last 30 or 40 years, which is how does government work down where the rubber meets the road? And we're going to have another tidal wave of money coming in. A lot of it's going to go to local governments and state governments, a lot of it into the public health community, a lot of it into education. And gee, everywhere I turn around, I see Washington money that is ill spent, not stolen, poorly spent, poorly managed in job training programs. I mean, Atlanta has zillions of dollars to help house people who have AIDS and can't spend the money. Programs, I'm working on a story for next week about the 5 or 6 year old effort by the State Department of Transportation to get more minority contractors to, get to have work. It's like 8%, and there's more white women with contracts than black contractors. My point is, with or without corruption or incompetence, a lot of this stuff, when it gets down to the local level, doesn't work well. How good as an industry, as a profession, are we going to be at dogging the money that comes out of DC and passes through the states and ultimately has to get down to the local level? Robin?
Hi, I'm still here. This is the job, isn't it? I mean, this is our job. We have to dog it. And when we have things like, the local housing authority or the development authorities, plural, whether they're local or county, and they're getting all these federal dollars in, and you can ORR all day long and say, I need to see this paperwork, but there's a lot more that happens besides. And that's something that I'm a one-person shop, and I'm really interested in following that money. But there are also only 24 hours in a day, and one of me and multiple stories going on. So, initiative or offering, quote unquote, pop-up newsrooms or funding a reporter to go to a local outlet for a year or something like that. But we really just have to start investing in the little operations like what I'm doing, like what Canopy Atlanta is doing, like what Decatur-ish is doing, where there's one person trying to perhaps crunch some numbers or write some code or go through a couple of mountains of paper to really pin down those kinds of stories and find out where that money is going and whether or not it's actually getting where it's supposed to go to the taxpayer at the other end.
Matthew, if I had to sum up my own frustration with how our business has shrunken and it changed in ways that don't make me happy, I would say there just aren't enough people going to not just city council meetings, city council committee meetings, school board meetings, development authority meetings. I know, you're in a small shop, but can you get hands-on enough of those local institutions to be sitting there when somebody says something that makes you look up from your Facebook page and go, holy moly, you said what?
Oh, and that has happened. And one thing for us is we've got 7 municipalities in our county, which at times makes my head spin. We've got the county, we've got the hospital authority, we've got 7 towns, we've got the school board. And like you said, they all have work sessions, meetings, committees, and DDAs and everything else like you're talking about. And we've got 3 or 4 of us doing everything. And we get to as many, we get to almost, we've done a pretty good job of getting to almost every regular meeting and work session. DDAs were a little tougher, but we kind of look at the agenda, see where they're at. But it's like you said, the other night we had in our paper today, it was revealed that it wasn't on the agenda, but it was revealed that in one of our towns in Demorest that the previous city manager canceled the insurance on all their down to liability only on all their vehicles and pump stations, so that when they lost those things, that they couldn't replace them. They just cost the city money, and they couldn't understand why they would do such a thing. And it was not even known to the council or anybody else. And it just sort of came out like, oh yeah, well, we didn't have the insurance. It's things like that, like you're saying, and you're like, wait a minute, what? How could you cancel your insurance? So, that's the kind of thing that just blew my mind. But we have a lot of boards and a lot of people to keep up with, and we're doing everything we can. We've got like a little calendar in the newsroom and saying, all right, who's going in there? Who's got this one? And we try to really, communication's very big. We just try to stick together and get to everywhere we can be.
Nicole, as you look ahead at your next 6 months to 12 months, what are you missing? In other words, what are you itching? Where are you itching to go, or what meeting do you want to attend? Because you just know there's something there if you just show up.
Well, I got into these state elections board meetings recently. And Robin, we follow each other and go through, I've been live tweeting through these, but there is a lot to pull from a meeting like that. Right now, they're in the middle of going through elections investigations, right? That are years old, giving us insight into sometimes stories we were covering. There was a lot of drama in Forest Park in 2017, and we're just now getting to hear the behind the scenes for that. And also wondering why the state pursues certain cases, what's behind that, what makes for how the Attorney General office handles all of these cases that come their way. I mean, we're talking about a backlog of 4 and 5 years, and how that's affected the way that these elections offices were working in this, cycle that we're now all paying attention to. So I really want to continue to take a look at the board, see what's going on there, and also data management for the state. One of the things that we've heard continuously through the past year is that our rural counties couldn't input data into a system that is already there, right? So when we can't do that in a timely manner, we don't have a full picture. So when is our infrastructure going to change to meet the needs of today? Because that's not going anywhere. And maybe now we're paying attention, but it's a real problem because we have to know what's going on there. So data, infrastructure, cybersecurity, elections board.
Jim, you and I have had the good fortune of working for the big boys, but our staffs are smaller. And that means just fewer people to go sit through the boring meetings where the little nugget will pop up. What are we missing? If you could give the people in Atlanta or across the state a couple of places that need more attention, what would they be?
Well, look, I think we're kind of in a lose-win situation. I mean, the AJC probably has a staff that's maybe half the size it was 20 years ago, and we don't have the bodies to place in. 20 years ago we had somebody whose job it was to cover zoning in Cobb County, and only zoning, and whose job it was to cover the Board of Education and only the Board of Education. That kind of specialization is gone, and likely not to return. I think the better news is that we have the cell phone camera. We have video. And we
Right.
have and they are in the hands of every citizen, just about every citizen, every adult citizen in Georgia, and they are carrying those cell phones with them to those meetings. There are I think the saving grace for us is going to have to be a more activated individual citizen, very much like Robin here. I mean, she's a one-woman operation, and I think we're going to have more of those. And the big media are going. We are going to place our efforts where we think we can get the most bang for the buck. Right now, for the AJC, it's very much in the state capitol. That's where we can have our biggest influence. We've got this huge fight brewing over election rules. That is our number one. That's their number one. It's not us anymore. It's them. That's the AJC's top priority. So you have to pick your battles. But I think the good part is you have a citizenry. They know what's right. They know what's wrong. And they can spot things, and they can pick up the phone. They can put it out on Twitter. They can put it out on Facebook. They can call us or you or Robin or Matthew and tell you all about it. Save you a lot of gumshoeing.
Jim, Nicole, Matthew, Robin, thank you very much. Thank you for what you do, especially our smaller market solo or near soloist operations. I have deep respect for what you do because you are down there truly where the corn is being ground and making the biscuits. And we appreciate what you do, Nicole. I love working with you. Peter Canfield, you ready to take it over?
I am. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone, for a tremendous way to close our conference this year. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we hope to see you again at this conference next year. Again, our thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Richard, everybody.